Tonight's speaker, Anna.
I'm Anna. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, Mike Bennett. Honorable mention to Mike Bennett. And I apologize, right, for all of us that know him. I don't mean to fuel the fire, he has been instrumental and consistent in my life and in my sobriety since I moved to Prescott. And I'm so grateful for that, because when I first moved here 3 years ago, I thought I was a normie. So my sobriety date is June 4th, 2005. I have been in service in one fashion or another the entirety of my sobriety. I listened today to an older, rarely speaker meeting tape that I did like a year and a half ago. And it was so interesting to listen to, because I could hear my resentments come through, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was the speaker and I had all these resentments. So, feel free to give me the high sign of Anna, you sound a little resentful. I don't want to live that way anymore. And I have a program that teaches me how to live free. So June 4th, 2005. So what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. And what it's like now is it's really, really good. It is better than it has been my entire sobriety since my sober date of June 4th this year. Something happened on June 4th. God showed up in my life in a mighty way. I went to a women's Matt Talbot retreat down in Scottsdale. It happens every year. It's not an AA approved, but Matt Talbot was an alcoholic, so it's attended by alcoholics, and the theme was the third step. And then I went to church, and I hadn't been to church for a while, and I went to church that Sunday while I was still down in Scottsdale with a sober sister who her sober date is June 6th, 2005. So her and I have been doing this together for 18 years. So I went to church with her, and I really got convicted. And I knew at the time that I got convicted, but when I think about what's happened since June 4th to my life right now today, I'm like in a spiritual experience. I have so much really amazing stuff going on. I'm having new epiphanies every single day. I was talking to Mike. Oh, and I want to apologize. Mike and I were up here whispering, and I apologize. I want to make an amends to the group for that. I think that's, I apologize. But I was telling him, I'm right now in this moment, I'm having a different experience. And part of me says, well, it's a new day. Of course you're having a new experience. I've never lived this day before. But I've spoken plenty of times, and to have absolutely nothing in my head before I come up here, because I'm usually like, oh, I got to talk about this. I got to make sure I do this. Blah, blah, blah. And so I did do a little prep work this afternoon. So maybe that's not wholly true, but to sit there and wait to come up here, I'm in a different space. So I had my first drink when I was 6 years old. I feel like I've told this story plenty of times, and forgive me if you've heard it, well, here we go. So I was 6 years old. My mom, we were driving in the Buick, no seatbelts on back in those days, on the way to the country club, and she handed me her glass of scotch and asked me if I would hold it for her. And I asked if I could try it, and she said yes, and I loved it. I was 6 years old, and I loved scotch. And my mom was really, she said, and I didn't remember any of this till I got sober, right? She was like, oh, well, scotch is an acquired taste. My 6-year-old daughter likes scotch. And I grew up a country club kid. And I remember the stories of, my parents would go to parties with Secret Service agents that would get drunk and talk about stories about things that happened at the White House. And because I lived in Maryland when I was a kid. And so, I grew up with this story about who I was supposed to be. My parents had this ideal about who I was supposed to be, and I was defiant from the beginning. I can remember like 6 years old just having this tantrum like coming out of my skin. Why is the world not doing what I think it should do? That wasn't vocabulary of a 6-year-old or however old I was. But I believe that I was born an alcoholic. I believe this is a gift of grace from God, and that I get to, the grace piece is I get to get sober. So drinking, little spots here and there in my childhood, and my freshman year in high school, I was suicidal, and I started drinking like shortly after that kind of really suicidal bout in my life. And I was on this slow suicide train drinking, because I drank for 20 more years. I was 36 when I got sober. And at 21 years old, my best girlfriend, who we have been best friends since we were 11, she texted me last night at 2:50 in the morning and said, I need your help, I drowning. Not I am drowning, I drowning. So when I woke up this morning at 4, which is about, I wake up usually right around 4, I thought, what should I do with this? And I prayed about it, because I want to have clear conscience with my decisions. And I texted her back and I said, I can teach you how to swim, because I know she's drunk. I've been sober for 18 years. She's been to one meeting with me, and she's still out there running and gunning, because at 21 years old, we're alcoholics. And 15 years later, I got sober, and, I don't know, 34 years later, she is still out there, and I'm watching her progression, and it's some of the worst powerlessness I've ever had. Because when I got sober, I was ready. So my story about getting sober, my pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization, I have more of that than I care to have, but I do. And part of that is, blacking out and waking up the next day and hearing the stories, or blacking out and having little ideas about what happened the night before, and the shame, right? That's the pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. All those people have gone on and lived their lives. Nobody was harmed, as far as I know. But I carried that shame for a really long time, and I carried that shame well into sobriety, 6 or 7 years into sobriety, before I realized I hadn't done a thorough 6-step. So I go to college, and it took me 8 years to get a bachelor's degree, because I really had a really good time drinking. I went to NAU. I picked a degree based on, cute guys, and we were laughing about that at dinner tonight. Because we went to dinner before this meeting, and I invite you to join us to dinner before the meeting, because that's where I make deep connections with other alcoholics in a way that I can't make with other people on the planet. You get me. I can be vulnerable with you. I can laugh about I got a degree based on guys look hot in football pants. So, and I had a pretty good little jaunt of career there because of that degree. So 8 years for a bachelor's degree, got married shortly after I graduated, because I'm already in my mid to late 20s, because I've been in college and undergraduate college for so long. Got married. We were married for 11 years. I was drinking the whole time, and had 2 amazing children that I am so proud of today. Everything else in my life is icing on the cake, because I have 2 kids who have been through hell with me in sobriety, and I like to believe, and they would affirm, that they are resilient today, and they make really good choices in their lives today based on all the things that they went through with a sober mom. So 11 years married, and I'm drinking, and it was about April of 2005, and I know there's something wrong, right? 21 years old, I knew I was an alcoholic. But here I'm now 36, and my life is not working to me. the rest of the world, or the people in my immediate vicinity of life, thought everything was fine. I had had good jobs. I had worked on Capitol Hill. Like, that was, that seemed like a really big deal to people. And that was, I thought I was there to change the world, and I was there at the service of a lot of misplaced power and ego. And I drank, right? I drank because I didn't fit there. I couldn't be true to myself. I was trying to play the game while I was there, and that's not who I am. I wasn't honest and vulnerable, and that's truly how I'm built, to be honest and vulnerable. So I drank a lot when I was in Washington, D.C. I would call my husband and say, the staff is going to a meeting, and that's where everything happens. I gotta go rub elbows with these people, with all these really important people. And all it was low-level staffers in the basement of the Republican club getting drunk, and then old men hitting on me. It was not a pleasant experience. And so I was drinking a lot. So we come back home to Arizona because that was not the best choice for us. And we're home a year from Washington, D.C. And I know there's a problem, and I look up an AA meeting, but I don't follow through. I don't go to it because it was in downtown Phoenix. And I was working in downtown Phoenix at the time. And I couldn't tell where the address was. And I thought it was like, some seedy part of town, probably somebody's backyard where I was going to get murdered. So I was not going to that meeting. And 3 months later, like, God knew, right? I had taken the first step, not knowing it, that I needed help, and God orchestrated the rest. And so on June 3rd, we are out to dinner, my husband at the time, my 2 little kids, with another family, and the man orders a coffee. And I'm like, oh, I felt so bad. Oh, I'm so sorry. I knew he was an alcoholic. His wife had told me. And he ordered coffee, and we were drinking. And he looks at me, he says, "Are you an alcoholic?" I'm like, well, yeah. He stands up in the booth, he puts his hand out, and he says, "I'm Jeff, and I'm an alcoholic." And I take his hand, and I'm like, "I'm Anna." It was so awkward. And he said, "Are you an alcoholic?" And I said, "Yeah, and I'm an alcoholic." It was so weird. And he said, "Do you want to get sober?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to get sober." And he didn't believe me, and I didn't understand why he didn't believe me at the time, right? I get it now. But at the time, I was ready. I wanted to get sober, and he took me to a meeting the next night at North Scottsdale Fellowship Club, and our out-of-town visitor, I know him from his earliest sobriety, my earliest sobriety from the North Scottsdale Fellowship Club, and I'm grateful that you showed up tonight. Like, that's what we do. We show up, and we support each other. And I went to a meeting that Saturday night, a speaker meeting, and I stood up and I said, "I'm Anna, I'm an alcoholic." And I've gone back to that club every year that I've been in Arizona to pick up my chip. I lived 8 years in Florida, but I had a couple years that I came home over my soberversary and picked up chips there. And then he invited me he said, "Do you want to go to another meeting the next night?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll go." And I thought at the time Alcoholics Anonymous was like my ladies' society clubs that I was in Washington, D.C., right? That we were going to meet every third Thursday of the month. And that turned out to not be the truth, right? That wouldn't have worked for me. So I go on Sunday night to a meeting, and they said, "Does anyone need a 24-hour chip?" And I literally thought that he orchestrated that whole 24-hour chip just for me. Yeah, welcome to the Anna chip, right? And, to think back of the delusion and who I was at 24 hours sober, what a gift that I stayed. And so this is what I heard, this is why I brought this tonight. This is what we read from that meeting. So the first meeting I went to was a speaker meeting. It was some curmudgeon guy in a plaid tweed jacket, and the only thing I remember him talking about is that his wife would put his cigarettes out after he passed out in bed. It's the only thing I remember from my very first meeting. My second meeting, this is what we read. It's from step 5 in the 12 and 12, page 57. What are we likely to receive from step 5? For one thing, we shall get rid of that terrible sense of isolation we've always had. Almost without exception, alcoholics are tortured by loneliness. Mic drop. Like, we didn't have that saying back then, but that was it for me. I had felt alone in a crowded room my entire life, and here I was in a meeting. It was in print, in a book, and everybody in the room is shaking their head, agreeing that everybody understood what that felt like. And I was home, and I have stayed sober since then, since June 4th. And I had, up until about a year ago, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that I'd been sober since the first day I came in, because my experience is relapse is common in our program. And I felt different because I haven't relapsed, and I thought I was going to get judged, so I didn't own it. It was like some false pride. And I don't know what happened, but like a year ago I started owning it. Like, I am really happy that I've stayed sober. I was taught early on that anything I put in front of my sobriety I'm going to lose, and if I drink I'm going to die. And I believe that. I believe that today, and that scared me enough, and it still scares me enough. I hope to stay in recovery because I'm getting really good life out of it. But I have a sense of fear. I'm afraid of a drink. I'm afraid of alcohol. I don't ever want to go back to that. So I come into the program, and I didn't get a sponsor. I did the steps all by myself. And I was back in that same room where I heard this reading, I don't know how long I was, trying to be sober at that time, probably within the first 2 months. And I had already done all the steps. I had asked some woman to listen to my 5th step. And I think back to, we were at lunch, and, I shed a tear, and I think I had this much stuff written down. I mean, it was, thank you, God, for saving me from myself. So we're in a meeting, and, I'm all that in a bag of chips. Just ask me because I've done the steps. And we're doing the 12 step. The topic's the 12 step. And it's coming around the table. And if you remember Crack the Whip, and how the momentum on the back end of the whip starts getting greater and greater and greater and greater, and it's coming around the table, and it's coming towards me, and I'm about ready to share on the 12th step about, how I help people. And as it's getting closer, this dread is coming over me, because I can't help anybody. I haven't done any work. I'm sorry, I'm looking at Oscar laughing at me. Well deserved, yes, thank you. I haven't done any work, but I'm about to share on the 12th step. And right, that God self, that inside of me knew better. And by the time it got to me, I fell apart. I couldn't even talk. I was crying so hard. And this young woman comes up to me. I was kind of younger at that point too, but she was younger than me. And she said, I will temporarily sponsor you. Her name is Catherine. And I met every week with her, and we read the book. We read from page 1, 100 alcoholics, seemingly hopeless, approved AA literature. She started me from the very first printed letter in that book through all the forewords. And at the time, it felt so ridiculous, actually. Why don't I just get to the good stuff? And I have such great appreciation for that, because I have never had a sponsor since then who sponsored like that. I got so much from that woman going through the book, and we did that for a few months. She went and did some outside help, and in that time I had a little tantrum because she wasn't around, so I got a new sponsor, and that sponsor was amazing as well. She died sober a couple of years ago. She had roughly around 40 years when she died, and great influence. I had great teachers and great influence, early sobriety. That woman who had 40 years, she was, in her 70s, and was pretty iconic at North Scottsdale Fellowship Club, Dolly. And she said to me, you're going to go to a 7 a.m. meeting every day. You're going to sit in front, You are not bringing your phone in, and you are paying attention. You're not talking, and you're only getting up if you absolutely have an emergency. And you're going to pay attention. You're going to get sober. And that's what I did. I was a little scared of her. She was like the Velvet Hammer. What a great lady. Helped tons of people. So I go to North Scottsdale Fellowship. I do most of the steps until I get to step 9. And I switch sponsors repeatedly at step 9. I do not know why that's funny, but it's the truth. Because I would always find something wrong with the sponsor, right? She wasn't sponsoring me right, or, I didn't really want what she had, or blah, blah, blah. And then I got a sponsor her nickname was Shotguns. And I picked her because I was scared of her, right? And she was into motorcycles. And so there's ding, ding, ding. All right, I was early sobriety. I was scared of her. She rode a motorcycle. I just bought a motorcycle 3 months ago, finally. And she said, I'm not doing the steps with you. You are full of crap. I am not putting up with you. You are going to Crossroads, and they had a Back to Basics workshop, and you went every week for 4 weeks, and you did the steps in sections. Some woman who showed up that week to be of service, I told her my 5th step, and I got to the 9th step, right? I wrote it out, but I didn't start doing my amends quite right away. And then all of a sudden, don't you know who I think I am? I'm working in racing. So early sobriety was actually really fun if I let myself be honest, it was fun. I used to just talk about the drudgery of my life and the victimization. It was really fun. I worked in racing. I was a public relations person. I was on TV and, got to drive race cars in the middle of the night with Navy SEALs and night glasses. I came up to Prescott and did a gun sight and, got trained on a 1911 and, low crawled through tunnels with my kids. I had a really, really good time. I got sidetracked. I don't know where I was. So shotguns. So I'm so cool. I have to go to a conference and I can't go to the last workshop, the last 4 out of 4 weeks of this Back to Basics. And so I call her and I'm like, I'll just catch it next time around. No, I got this. Oh, she wasn't having it. She was not having it. She said, you told me you were willing to go to any length and you're going to eat the ticket, the plane ticket I had paid for, to go to this conference early. I didn't have to go early. I just thought I was so important I had to go early. There was no reason to go early. Just cunning, baffling, powerful, right? Get me out of the steps. She said, no, you're going to eat the plane ticket and you're going to go to that workshop. And that's what I did. And when I reflect on it, and I finished my steps, right? I did my steps. I ended up, my 9th step took a while to get through all of those amends. And the ability to say I did my steps, I am not I don't finish things. I start a lot of things. I cut and run on things, cut and run on the sponsors, cut and run on jobs. I get afraid. I don't know I'm afraid. I have a really good justifier, and I make up reasons and excuses of why I can't do whatever's happening anymore, and then I'm out. And I leave, right? Ain't it great? Ain't it grandma, the wind stopped blowing, right? I'm the tornado through people's lives. And learning how to sit still, I'm just now doing that. My children, my children are 21 and 22 years old, and my 21-year-old has lived in more places than years he's been alive. That is how unstable my life was raising my children as a single mom. Sober, single mom, always active in the program, but really kind of a lot of chaos for my kids. And I don't want to do that anymore, right? COVID hit, I'm living in Florida, and the drunk friend who texted me this morning, called me and said, hey, she said, the world's coming to an end. You have to come home. And I said, okay, I'm coming home, because if the world's coming to end, I didn't know. If that's a possibility, I want to be in Arizona where my people are, right? Because I grew up down in Scottsdale. So we moved from Maryland to Scottsdale when I was 10, right? That's how I ended up getting back to Scottsdale after Washington, D.C. Sober there for 7 years, moved to Ahwatukee, moved a bunch of different dwellings and places. And then I'm sober 7 years. I'm working a program, very active in the AA, North Scottsdale Fellowship, sponsees. And, I went back to school. I got a master's degree in forensic psychology. And I got to work on a serial murder case down in Phoenix. And so I had my own consulting business. And then there was a dip in my business. And I wasn't prepared for that. I was a brand new business owner. I didn't know what I was doing. And my ex-husband had moved to Florida. And I was asking for additional support from him. And he said, just send the kids to Florida. Well, I'm not sending my kids to Florida. He kept saying it. So eventually, I just gave in. And you know how your sponsors know stuff, right? My sponsor's like, well, I'm glad you finally surrendered to that, because that's the best choice. And I moved there because I was drowning financially in Scottsdale. I was really alone. My parents were elderly and were depending on me for stuff that they didn't need me to do, but were putting a lot of pressure on me to do. And I had little kids. So I said, fine, we're all coming to Florida. So my kids flew out to Florida. I sold everything I owned, packed up my car, drove across country sight unseen. And I lived in the Daytona area of Florida, Port Orange, if anyone's familiar with that area at all. For 8 years, I was in Florida, active there, had sponsor there. I actually had the same sponsor for 6 of the 8 years that I lived there, motorcycle chick, Italian. She was a velvet hammer. She didn't work out of the book, though. I use the steps for as much as I possibly can. Everything's not realistic, but as much as I can. So for example, I'm driving over here today, and a friend from Florida, she has about 14 years now, and she's such a godsend. We keep in touch. And she called, and she's having a relationship issue. She was telling me about what's going on with her boyfriend, and I said, well, okay, that sounds like a step 2 issue, right? I use the steps when I'm talking to sponsees, or if I'm talking to somebody in the program that I think can grab onto that, because she's got some insanity going on in her relationship. So go back and take a look at your step 2. So my sponsor for 6 years in Florida was not that kind of sponsor. I had to find other people in the program who work their program that way, because I'm pretty scared of letting you in, right? And I have a woman who I have a relationship with. She doesn't sponsor out of the book, which is what I am looking for, but I'm not willing to do anything about it at that time. So I have kept in touch with her. I hold on to the book as much as I possibly can. I moved to Arizona. Are you guys keeping up with me? I feel like I got a little lost there. Sorry. I moved to Arizona. I moved back 3 years ago. My younger son is a COVID graduate, 2020. So in Daytona, they actually drove around the speedway for their graduation. Like, they had to stay in their cars and have their diplomas handed to them, but because of COVID, they couldn't have any contact. So he was supposed to play college football in Fresno, but that got shut down. He ended up living in Safford, Arizona for 2 years. And then my older son is at the Merchant Marine Academy, and he has 1 more year till he graduates, and I am super proud of these boys. The younger one ended up getting picked up, or he did a walk-on at New Mexico State. So his dreams are coming true to play Division I football. He didn't get to play last year. He blew his ACL. We went to 3 games last year, and so the first game is August 26th, so we're going to go see my youngest play. And I have a relationship with these boys today where they want a relationship with their mom. They have a sober mom. That's not so much of what I perceive as happening at their dad's house. Their dad's still in Florida. And today, my life for the last 3 years living here, when I moved here, I joined a women's organization, a normie women's organization. You know, I'm still an alcoholic. I go to meetings every once in a while, and Mike Bennett just scooped me up. And I really honestly believe if that man had not grabbed onto me and invited me into, hey, we go to dinner, hey, join us for this, hey, come to this meeting. I honestly believe if that hadn't happened, like, I was heading for a drink. And I am, like, eternally grateful. And he has shown up in my life in the last 3 years multiple times in that space of grace where I don't know I'm in trouble until after the fact. And so in 3 years, I didn't know Prescott is a recovery town. I moved here because I can, right? I'm an empty nester. And have you ever visited someplace and you're like, God, I'd like to live here? Well, that's how I feel about living here. Like, I would like to live here, and I do. I get to do that because my kids are strong, smart, stable. They're financially independent at their age. I get to go live my life, and they want me to go live my life. They want me to be happy, joyous, and free. So, ended up working in treatment, not why I moved here. I'm so grateful that has happened. In the last couple of years, I actually worked in treatment in Florida at a women's treatment facility. And so it's a women's treatment facility. We have 60 beds, moms and their kids can come, and I'm in a staffing one day. And I'm the only staff member in recovery. So I'm at a staffing, and there's, 8 or 10 other women around the table. And someone's talking about a client, and they're like, yeah, well, she's on house arrest. And so she's watching Netflix, drinking vodka, and she has 2 boyfriends bringing her movies and pizza. And I'm like, that sounds awesome. The whole table was like, what are you talking about? So thank you very much for appreciating, I'm glad I don't live like that. But I'm at a table of normies. They just can't appreciate how that's like an active user's dream come true. So my life today is very blessed. I have a very small amount of people that are very intimate in my life that I let in. And I know a lot of people, and I love a lot of people, and I want to be a woman of dignity and grace, and I want to live the 11th step. And I have my own business. I work for myself. I do contract work. I just moved into a house in downtown Prescott that is just amazing. I have my own studio that I'm going to do some healing workshops. I have people coming in to do some healing workshops. I'm going to do some writing workshops. I have a motorcycle. I have a motorcycle. And it's scary, and it's nerve-wracking, and it's been one of the best backbone building exercises I've had. I mean, recovery is really, I've had a couple of sponsors along the way say, thank God you finally got a backbone. But my backbone keeps growing because I can be a very afraid individual. And motorcycle riding, I was thinking about that. There's that saying, ride your own ride. And so I can think it, and I can intellectually understand what that means. But I think that actually riding the motorcycle is I'm owning it in all of my life. I get to make the decisions in my life. I have overly relied on sponsors, and that's what I needed. And I don't need that anymore, right? I was a daily caller for sponsors up until about 6 months ago. Every single day I would call my sponsor, overly rely upon somebody else's opinion in my life, somebody else's point of view. And I don't do that anymore. Part of me is like, okay, they're all looking at you, you're 54, you have 18 years sober, and you're not making your own decisions. Part of me is like, that's awful. And the other part of me is I am free today. I didn't know that was available to me, that I am an adult. I'm responsible for my choices. I could say that. I've probably said that my whole life, but I'm owning it today. I'm willing to take all the consequences of my choices. It's nobody else's fault. It's nobody else's responsibility. I get to make choices. And while I still might be afraid of what you think about me, because that happens, I'm not going to drink over it. And I'm going to get past that because that's just my disease. Trying to get in any way it can today. And by the grace of God, I am sober today. I am so grateful all of you are here. If I can be of service in any way, shape, or form, please grant me that privilege. Thank you.
Okay, Ryan, please escort our speaker to the door. I would like to thank Chris for reading How It Works and Dan for reading the 12 Traditions, and let's give our speaker another big hand. We record our speakers, and you can go to Rarely Group on YouTube to listen to all past speakers. If you need help finding the site, see Bobby, who's standing in the aisleway with his hand up. He'll be glad to help you after the meeting. Would everyone please pick up any trash you have left so we leave the room as clean as we found it. And thank you very much for staying seated and being polite during our speaker. And now, if you would just stand in place and hold hands, we'll close with the Lord's Prayer.